Typhoon brought these two together. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to find out more about these Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com.
Welcome to the Bearded Theologians Beardcast for June the 2nd of 2016. I'm Zach Bechtold.
And I'm Matt Franks.
And today we're going to be talking about evangelism. And unfortunately, over time, in the last few years, evangelism has gotten a bad rap. Too often we think it's going out and preaching from the street corner or throwing our Bible at people or just being really aggressive about sharing Jesus. But in reality, I think evangelism boils down to telling our story, sharing our experience with Christ and how He's working in our lives. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. A little bit of our stories and how we share those stories in a thoughtful and relevant way that doesn't just cram Jesus down people's throats, but it invites them into a relationship and to their own experience with Christ. So Matt, where have you been able to practice evangelism, or how's a healthy way you've been able to share your story?
So I have to admit, and I really have to preface this, that when I first started out in ministry, one of the spiritual gifts tests that I had to take in the process towards ordination was a spiritual gift inventory. And when I got the spiritual gift inventory back, it said one of my strong gifts that I have is evangelism. And when I got that back, I literally was in my mentor's office crying, because my understanding of evangelism at the time was what I saw on TV with Oral Roberts and TBN and all those other things, those evangelistic thoughts and ideas where if you walk up to the front and the guy puts your hand on your head, you're saved, or you can put your hand on the TV and whatever you're going to pray for will be taken care of. And then the street evangelists in the community that I lived in and the communities I had been in, that's what I had understood as evangelism. And kind of through a process of discernment with my pastor, he agreed that I do have the gift for evangelism, and he pointed me towards more of being able to share not just my story, but being able to share how faith has made an impact on my life. And for me, that has been one of those things that has been extremely powerful. My approach to evangelism isn't about just walking into somewhere and being like, I'm going to share the good news with this particular group of people. The way that I've handled evangelism is through building relationships, meeting people's basic needs, sharing with them why I'm doing what it is I'm doing, and talk about how my faith in Jesus Christ has made an impact on me to be able to share this good news that is the story of Jesus and that salvation that is there for all of us to receive. And I have found that to be very powerful. And it's amazing when I talk about evangelism in the churches that I've served. I've tried to educate them to tell your story, tell about why you do what you do and how that has made an impact on you, and that you do these things because of your faith, or you have made it through this particular time in your life because of your faith. And that is where the trueness of evangelism comes out, because people see that authenticity of how faith has made an impact on their life. And when we see something good, everybody wants something good. And we think about that, how often when the new technological advice comes out and it's a really good advice and people talk about, oh, this does this, this does this, and that really helps me do this. And why can't we do that with the gospel? Why can't we talk about how the gospel has made an impact on our lives to be able to share with people that may not understand the good news? And, we're now in an age in this country where so many people aren't drugged to church, and they don't have that background of they went to Sunday school, they went to VBS their whole lives, and they've never heard the story of Jesus. There's so many people in this country and in this world that have never heard the story of salvation and the impact that it can make on their lives to make this world a better place. And I think that for me is the thing that drives me to talk about why I do what I do. And I think that to me is what evangelism looks like versus a program, a pamphlet, or any street evangelism could ever do. What about you, Zach?
Well, I think the same thing, and it really didn't. Doing a lot of youth ministry at the first part of my ministry, it was all about building relationships and mentoring students and just getting to know them and letting them get to know me. And even I found myself there if I told other people stories. I kept my personal life and struggles and successes kind of to myself. I didn't hit that place of being vulnerable until I started doing campus ministry, and I had college students who were away from home for the first time coming in to my office and just pouring themselves out of, I don't know what to do, I don't know where I am, why. And I began to share my experiences. Here's how God worked in my life as I sat exactly where you were. And I saw a difference in the way that I began to do ministry. Rather than trying to tell somebody else's story or share an experience that somebody else had, beginning to share my own. And I carried that into the church itself, into congregation with all ages, and serving in places where you're by far one of the youngest people in the church, and you begin to share your experiences with the elders of the church, the people who have been there all their lives, and they begin to connect with that. Yeah, I remember when I was there, and I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you do too, Matt, of how do you get young people in the church? And I think that's the wrong question to ask as we look at our congregations and we look at our communities, because we don't need just young people. We need all people, and that's the question I begin to encourage folks is quit searching for a group of people or young people or these people. Go for all people, and then usually the follow question is, well, how? And I like to use the evangelism word, one, because it's a scary word, or in some places it's a dirty word. Oh, we can't do evangelism. That turns people off. Well, no, it doesn't. If we share our story, if we share parts of our soul and be vulnerable in that, we begin to build that authenticity in we as pastors, we as members of the church, and just as people in general, begin to take bricks out of our walls and say, here I am, I've struggled with this in life, and here's how God has filled that. Here's how God has picked me up and offered me forgiveness and grace and allowed me to move forward. And for so many people, one, they've either never been encouraged to share their story, or maybe they don't believe that they have a story to share. They've seen the TV people, they've read the books, and people have these amazing stories of being brought out of drugs and alcohol and just awful situations. And they sit there and they share, they're like, I've had a pretty good life, nothing crazy has ever happened. I don't have a story to tell. But I encourage people, but you do, know the grace in your life isn't insignificant. The places that God is working is not insignificant. You have a story. Please, find the courage, find the power to begin to share that, because there's somebody in your life somewhere who needs to hear that. And I think we just think that it's so much that big, amazing story pulling you out from rock bottom that's what it has to be to share a story, but it's not. I mean, those are great stories and empowering, but not everybody has those, and I think we need to encourage people to find that one grain of grace and begin to tell that story and watch it grow and see where God's working in their lives and then in the lives of the people around them through that.
I think for me, one of the kind of bigger shifts in the way that I handle evangelism. I picked up a book a few years ago called "Transforming Evangelism: The Wesleyan Way of Sharing Faith" by Hal Knight. That has made such an impact on me and how I talk about evangelism, and even in our whatever context I'm in. Um, I think that that resource was such a good resource, and I would encourage those of the Wesleyan persuasion to look at that book, because it will help you at least cultivate some thoughts on how you can do effective evangelism. And I think that that's important, is that we need to look at how we're telling our stories and what news are we sharing. Because let's be honest, in this day and age, all sorts of news can be shared, whether it's our good news or our bad news in our lives and our congregations. And what we choose to share with the world is vitally important. And I think that that's sometimes we forget that. And in this day of social media, where you can post whatever you want to share what you believe or share who you are, I think that the more you share the good news and the way that it speaks to you, the better it can be. But I think we're so afraid of what people are going to say, and we're so afraid of how people are going to view us, that when they find out that we are a believer, or if we are what we think we are, um, it we should be very aware of that, versus trying to, you know, be one way or the other. And I think that we should embrace who we are and tell the story of how our faith has made an impact on us and those around us. And I think that what you'll find is that people will be more attracted to that, and the authenticity of that, versus, grabbing, the Bible or a book and be like, kind of laying down the law. And I think that, in all honesty, the biblical approach is getting to know the people first, and then being good to them, and then sharing, well, I do this because of my faith. I mean, Jesus kind of laid down that example in the way that Jesus did evangelism. And I think we've forgotten that model so much, because we're looking for that next great pill to save the church. And let's be honest, the pill is us, and it's us living into our faith in such a way that people say, wow, we know they're a Christian by the way that they live their life. And I would pray that that would be a positive thing versus the negative that's out there, because let's be honest, there are a lot of idiots out there that make our job of sharing the faith and how we see and feel about Jesus Christ a lot harder than those that are those stumbling blocks for us. So Zach, as you think about evangelism, you think about our discussion today, what are some things that kind of have bubbled up with you in these few minutes?
Well, I want what I want to do is begin to, or continue to, create space for people to tell their stories. This being one of them. But also that encouragement as they build relationships with people in coffee shops and on airplanes and in taxi cabs, at their workplaces or at school, or wherever you are, that you see people and you begin to build a relationship, whether even if it's for 5 minutes or for a lifetime, that they find those windows to be authentic, to share a little bit of who they are and how God's working in their lives. Not to cram it down people's throat or anything like that, but to just be authentic about it. Just be true to who they are, so that when you leave that conversation, like you said, people know who you are and why you do what you do in a productive way. That's kind of what bubbles up in me, is creating that space, giving opportunity for people to be empowered to share a little bit of themselves with folks. What about you, Matt?
So because of a lot of traveling I've been doing lately, like today I'm in Oklahoma City, and I've been traveling a lot lately. I've been listening to the Hamilton soundtrack, the musical Hamilton soundtrack, and there's a discussion between Aaron Burr and Hamilton, and they're talking about, what do you stand for? And Burr's kind of neutral, doesn't want anybody to know who he is, and Hamilton wears his emotions on his sleeve and is willing to kind of really put it out there. And I've been thinking about, there's some kind of conflict between those two, and they talk about, the importance of really standing for something. Hamilton's really adamant about that, and I think that's what we need to be. I think far too often we're too afraid to share our story and to share the good news and how that has made an impact on us and our lives, uh, because it is scary. It is putting us out there. But I think what you'll find is that people will see Christ in your story, whether it's a really kind of one of those amazing grace stories, I was once lost and now I'm found, or if it was one of those, I went to church my whole life and I've known Jesus my whole life. Those stories are just as important as those amazing grace stories, because we need people like that to kind of keep those amazing grace people to come out of the woodwork. And I think far too often we feel, and I know people that have felt this way. I didn't, my experience isn't that. I definitely didn't grow up in the church, and um, mine is an amazing grace story. But I do remember a time when I was with some friends, and I had a friend tell me, she really was like, I would love to have your story. She's like, I grew up at a church my whole life. I did everything that I was supposed to do, and I would love to have your story. And I looked at her and said, your story is just as important as mine. And don't let anybody ever tell you that your story is not important. And I think that that's the key, is to realize that your story, your life, will speak volumes to your faith when you allow it to. And I think that that's the key. You have to allow it to and not be afraid. And I think far too often we live in fear of sharing the good news, because it is a scary place when we do that.
I think that's a good place, to begin to be passionate about our stories, just as passionate about our stories and where grace is working as we are about, football or, I don't know, whatever else people get passionate about. We get passionate about those things, and yet sometimes with the church, with our stories, with Jesus, with the good news, with whatever you want to call it, we're not so passionate about it. We're a little more timid to talk about it, but we'll talk about the Cowboys all day long. We'll talk about the Thunder. We'll talk about that new movie with such passion. I hope that we begin to create places and empowerment to have that same passion about our stories, where God's working on our lives, to share it in the same way that we will around the water coolers at work and in our lives. That's my hope.
And so today, as we bring this to a close, I would love to continue to have those conversations about evangelism and what your thoughts are about that. Would also encourage you to check out our little post about the annual conference meme competition, because we're giving away maybe at least one free coffee mug, at least not two, and would love to be able to handle those out. At this point right now, we have 0 entered, so if you entered 2, you may end up with 2 coffee mugs, and so kind of keep that in mind. But we'd love to hear back from you, and realize that we started this with the intention of showing and sharing the gospel in our own unique way. And we did this with the true intention of bringing light into the world. And this is one way for us how we can share how we feel about our faith and how we're living it out, not only as clergy people in the United Methodist Church, but as people in this particular day and age, because we would love for someday to look back upon this and be able to show this to people and say, hey, this is how we did it then. And we hope that the journey continues on. And so I want to encourage you to continue to share your story and share how the gospel has made an impact on your life and how it continues to make an impact on your life, because faith is a journey. Life is a journey, and it's never complete until that final day when God stands before you and says, good and faithful servant, come and rest. But until that day happens, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so I want to encourage you to continue to keep telling the story and do not be afraid, or as my t-shirt says, don't panic. And so we leave that with you this week. And so I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold.
And we're the Bearded Theologians, and we wish you best graces and peace this week.